Hello everyone, Pete Brooker here, There Will Be Bond. Today I'm going to give you 5 ways how we can bring Daniel Craig back as James Bond. Now, people may have varying opinions on Daniel Craig's tenure as Bond. Some bloody love him, some were happy to see him blown to smithereens. But I don't think we can question his dedication to the role, and who knows, we might not realise how lucky we were to have Daniel Craig as Bond in future years, depending on whether we get Bond back at all, what the next Bond actor might be like. I wasn't a fan of No Time to Die per se, but I did think it had some really good moments. The Matera sequences in particular I thought were really good. I thought the set designs were done really well. Safin's lair had that beautiful dystopian Ken Adam design-esque look, I suppose. But I did find the ending problematic. It wasn't really what I wanted from a Bond film. When I saw it at the premiere, I even stopped clapping at the end when the credits rolled until they said James Bond will return. That's when the whole auditorium erupted. And I think Daniel Craig was actually quite pleased to be killed off as Bond at the end. It saves anybody asking, is he ever going to come back as Bond? I believe he even asked Barbara during Casino Royale whether he could kill Bond. And so I'm going to give you 5 ways that we can bring Daniel Craig back as Bond. And don't worry, none of them involve a Bobby Ewing dream-esque sequence. So here goes. Number 1. What if the next James Bond continuation novel was written from the perspective of James Bond, first person perspective, and we had Daniel Craig narrate the audiobook? So the Fleming books, I believe, they're all written in what's called close third person perspective, with the exception of Your Eyes Only, which I believe was written first person from the Havelock girl. What's her name? Never mind. So, you know, like how Len Dayton writes Harry Palmer from the first person perspective, we could have Daniel Craig read James Bond from first person perspective if we get a continuation novel written from Bond's point of view. That's number 1. Number 2, we could have Craig come back and do the in-between films. So where there was long spaces of time that nothing happened or we don't know what happened to Bond during those times, Daniel Craig could come back and fill in those stories. For example, in No Time to Die, at the end of the pre-titles, he bungs Madeline on the train, says, "See you later, love." And then he's in Jamaica, you know, how many ever years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later. What was he doing? What was he doing in Jamaica for that long? I know he set up a really cool home with one of those prop desks where the gun goes in. Got to get me one of them. But I'd love to have the 4 or 5 years of Bond in Jamaica before Felix rocks up. Perhaps he could do some kind of, I don't know, like an Equalizer type film where he goes around and sorts out all the mafia and all the bad guys and rights all the wrongs. Wait, that sounds a bit like Quantum Leap. Anyway, you get my drift. Or there's a nice little gap in Skyfall, again at the end of the pre-titles when he gets shot and then falls into the ravine and then he's enjoying death for long periods. What's he doing there? How long was he? I know he turned into a really, really good alcoholic. Maybe we could get some dirty alcoholic Bond years. That would be a good, interesting movie. Or maybe we can get a pre-Casino Royale film with a little bit of de-aging. We followed Daniel's Bond before he takes out Dryden and Fisher in the toilets. We can see what he gets up to, how he gets enrolled into the MI6, how he gets scouted. And by the way, if you're interested in Casino Royale, segue, doing a minute-by-minute review on the podcast, I'll leave a link in the show notes. We're currently up to about minute 45, I think, so jump on board with that. By the way, I just realised I've got the freeze frame of Daniel telling Q, "Quite tricky to do in your pyjamas," you know, from the Skyfall scene, and I'm actually in my pyjamas, but don't need to see that. Number 3, flashbacks. Flashbacks. How about some flashbacks? We all love flashbacks. Judi Dench's M came back in Spectre with a flashback, right? A video. You know, don't forget the funeral, Bond. Brilliant. We get another bit of Judi Dench's M. We could also have Bond record a couple of videos for Matilda, you know, his daughter from No Time to Die. He was fairly sure by then that that was his daughter, so that could work. I'm thinking on the plane before he went with Nomi to Safin's lair, he could have recorded about 20 or 30 minutes of footage on his blower. We can sprinkle that over the next film. We can get Bond to give some lessons to Matilda on how to kick ass, or maybe even some cooking tutorials. Who knows? Daniel Craig can come back as M's ghost. So, hang in there. M is now a tortured soul. He's turned to drinking. His project, his Heracles project, you know, that really went south, didn't it? It wasn't a good idea, and he's ridden with guilt that he's the one that killed Bond. So he's now just going down rules on his own, drinking wine, not turning up for work, and so he's now having delusions as well. He's now seeing Daniel Craig as Bond. You know, he's sitting next to him and he's like, oh, that wasn't a very good idea, was it, M? You know, that Heracles and all that bollocks. So Bond is basically M's imaginary friend. A bit like Drop Dead Fred, without the practical jokes. Or Looking for Eric, that weird one with Eric Cantona that's actually quite good. Okay, let's move on to my favorite one, number 5. Number 5, Daniel Craig has fallen. Yes, I've spoken about this on the podcast before, but bears repeating. So Daniel Craig is attending his James Bond premiere at the Royal Albert Hall. And everybody is there, obviously, the premiere. He's looking at himself on the big screen as James Bond. He's come back as James Bond. And then all of a sudden, the whole theatre, the auditorium is taken over by activists, terrorists, or Just Stop Oil, whatever. But Gerard Butler is there as Daniel Craig's bodyguard. And during the screening, Daniel Craig and Gerard Butler, they popped off to the toilet to take a pee or do whatever. And that's when the whole theatre got taken over by terrorists. So, you know, it's a bit like Die Hard with Daniel Craig and Gerard Butler, but in a way, Daniel Craig has come back as Bond because you can see him up on the big screen there. And he's at the Royal Albert Hall where the premieres normally are. So it'll be like watching a Bond film in secret cinema, but a good version of secret cinema. Anyway, so that's 5 ways Daniel Craig can come back as Bond. Let me know if you liked any of those. I think Daniel Craig has fallen. It's not a bad shout. I might fucking write that myself. Let me know which one was your favorite in the comments below. Thank you for liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one. Wherever the camera is. Bang. Melina Havelock. That's it, Melina Havelock.